I would like to announce the results of the special private business meeting. The House called for the expulsion of Major Sanderson. Black, 4, 109 voted in favour, 31 voted against the motion. Therefore, the motion is carried. I would like to thank Theodore Wilson very much indeed for that maiden speech. And I now call upon Emma Jenks, Trinity Treasurer, also in her maiden speech.
This may, Madam President, be my maiden speech, but of course it may not be my last this term. I am very honoured to be speaking opposite Theodore Wilson tonight. The difference between his speech and mine is that mine has evolved over millions of years, while his was created in 4004 BC. It's a pity he hasn't had time to translate it out of the original Sanskrit. Madam President, in a week that has seen the release of Anatoly Sharansky, the near release of Nelson Mandela, the introduction of union-style elections in the Philippines, and the announcement of Mark Carnegie's third presidential campaign, how appropriate that you should confront this society with a controversy that was raging in the 1850s. I'm surprised you didn't make it an emergency motion. Firstly, I would like to make it very clear that speaking on this side of the House, I do not deny the existence of God. Secondly, I know that everything an evolutionist can say may be countered by the creationist saying, God did it that way. The most extreme fundamentalists argue that it is sinful to attempt to explain any form of revelation, which makes scientific inquiry something opposed to God's will. It is worth remembering that the author, or authors of Genesis, were doing the same thing that we're doing, trying to explain a process which was a complete mystery. The authors of Genesis may well have had divine inspiration, but who is to say that Charles Darwin was not similarly inspired? Some creationists would argue that they are not dogmatic. They argue that creationism is a science. But in order to be scientific, their claims must be verifiable. But even the most scientific claims of the creationists are unverifiable because the intervention of God is an essential component in their argument. But who can prove that God has acted? Creation is a mystery beyond inquiry. The process of evolution is not and can be studied. Hence its superior validity in the context of this debate. Fleming, who is from the creationist school, has written a book entitled, Is God's Bible the Greatest Murder Mystery Ever Written?, in which he argues with little fact but much flamboyance that dinosaurs and other extinct organisms have never existed but were created as fossils in the earth to demonstrate the wit of God. This is the worst of dogmatic religion, in that it combines a refusal to face with reality with a mechanism that means one never has to do so. I can only appeal tonight to the rational members of the House, and I believe those rational members to see quite clearly that if God created the world, he would not have done it by blurring fact and illusion. It is not part of God's nature to deliberately deceive us. And I'm sure the other side of the House will agree. Another point I would like to raise with the creationists is their insistence that God is bounded by time. that if the Bible says he created the world in 6 days, he literally did. What they fail to remember is that God transcends time, and in his terms, days are meaningless. Up until now, I have been trying to examine a coherent doctrine of creation, an impossible task. I am not going to pull the Bible apart. Attacking the words in the Bible as a coherent theory of how species came into being was a valid way of debating the issue over 100 years ago. What's happening now? The creationists have been reduced to poking holes in evolution rather than producing a coherent case for themselves. I have to rebuff the attacks being made on one of the greatest scientific insights of the last 200 years. That insight was that over time, species evolve and some become extinct in response to environmentally selective pressures on naturally diverse populations. The population's diversity having been produced by randomly generated mutations. That, as the axiom of evolution, stands as the thing which governs all that we see in the natural kingdom. How did the process start? A concept, an enigma, a conundrum. How did life evolve? We just don't know. But what we do know is that conditions on Earth before life evolved have been replicated in the laboratory. The primeval soup and the massive electrical storms. Lo and behold, what are produced are amino and nucleic acids, the basic components of life. But that's not life itself, argue the creationists. The fact that a virus... For the contention that life could have arisen randomly in the 10 million years or so where the conditions were conducive to its generation.
How do we know the conditions were like that before?
We just don't know. We on this side are grappling with the same phenomena as the other side of the house. We are both trying to explain the great mystery of life, but we're not trying to ignore the facts. Finally, I would like to refer you to a text with which I'm sure you're all very familiar, the Second Vatican Council minutes of 1968. And I quote, "Today, as never before perhaps, there is a clear possibility of profound agreement between true science and true faith, both of which are servants of the one and only truth. The difference between us and the other side of the house is that we are trying to reach that truth with the help of one of God's greatest gifts, reason. I beg to oppose."